Less than a month ago, you were at the White House. You seemed very cordial, friendly with President Trump. The two of you were joking. You said you were going to walk away with a good deal. He said that we would be very happy. Is the U.S. toying with Canada, and how did your relationship with Donald Trump go south so fast?
It's a question for him.
Look at Mark Carney's face here. The jaw tight, the eyes narrowed. You can see the frustration. Moments earlier, a reporter asked about his recent visit to the White House and about Trump. Carr's answer, just 2 words. That is a question for him. No denial, no explanation. And yet that silence said everything. Because right after that, he started talking about new partnerships with China and other alliances, the kind that make Washington very nervous. Canada no longer is dependent on the U.S. for its future because we have a strong workforce, and PM Carney is already forging new ties internationally like China.
President Trump says he's canceled these trade talks because he's upset about the Ontario government ad. We've heard from the Business Council of Canada and even some of President Trump's own advisors who suggest the frustration with Canada runs deeper. So is this about the ads or is this about something else?
Well, look, as I say, and there were a series of very detailed, very specific, very comprehensive discussions, negotiations on the areas I just listed in response to the previous question, up until the point of those ads running. First point. Second point, I would suggest you take the president at his word. For his reason. And that is the reason why, from the perspective of the federal government, which I'm responsible, we stand ready to pick up on those discussions when the United States wishes to pick up on those discussions.
Mark Carney's latest appearance had everyone talking not because of what he said, but how he said it. When a reporter asked about Trump terminating relations with Canada over those Ford anti-tariff ads, Carney didn't flinch. He smiled. The kind of smile that says, "We've outgrown this drama." But before we get into what Carney hinted about the China deal, we have to look at what just happened. Trump tried to frame Canada as disloyal, accusing Ottawa of siding with Beijing simply for refusing to bow to his tariff tantrums. Yet Carney didn't take the bait. His tone stayed calm, measured, and diplomatic, because real leadership isn't loud, it's steady. But that's not all, because what came next changed the entire tone of the room. Carney leaned in slightly and said, "We're open to talks if the U.S. is ready." No begging, no defensiveness, just quiet authority. It was Canada saying, "We'll meet you halfway, but we won't chase chaos." But Carney was just getting started because that single line said more than any press release. It told the world that Canada's future doesn't hinge on Washington's approval. Trade is shifting east. Partnerships are expanding. And Carney knows it. He's playing a long game, one built on respect, not reaction. But if you thought that was it, watch his body language again. Calm, controlled, almost amused. Because when Trump shouts about loyalty, Carney answers with confidence. Canada isn't asking for validation, it's leading by example. And that's exactly what rattles Trump the most.
We're ready to have those discussions to further improve them, and we'll have them when it's appropriate. But we're not resting because we can build, the return on building at home is far greater than the hit from trade turbulence with the United States. And the opportunities internationally are considerable. And candidly, Canada has not focused on the relationships to the same extent as we should have in any trading environment with the United States, let alone a situation where they're changing their trade policy. And that's what we're doing now.
When Mark Carney finally addressed Trump's latest trade outburst, he didn't need to raise his voice. His silence, his posture, even the pause before answering said everything. Reporters asked if Canada was worried now that Trump claimed he'd terminated relations after those Ford anti-tariff ads. Carney just smiled, calm, almost amused, as if to say, We've outgrown this drama. But before we get into what Carney hinted about the China deal, we have to see what made this exchange so powerful. Trump accused Canada of betraying the U.S., called our leadership weak, and tried to frame our independence as disloyalty, the usual theater. Yet Carney stayed composed, respectful, grounded, unbothered. Because real authority doesn't need noise, it needs clarity. But that's not all. Because Carney quietly flipped the conversation. He reminded everyone that Canada has always been capable of producing at home. We have the workers, we have the skill, we have the pride, he said, not as a slogan, but as a statement of fact. He spoke of patriotic Canadians who build quality products every single day, proving that resilience isn't imported, it's built here. But Carney was just getting started here, because then he pointed to the future. He mentioned that the world isn't limited to one trading partner. He didn't say China outright, but the hint was clear. He talked about expanding partnerships, about markets open to fairness and cooperation. It was a polite way of saying, if Washington wants to wall itself off, fine. Canada will keep building bridges elsewhere. But if you thought this was it, Carney went even deeper. He stressed that Canada's economy doesn't depend on who's shouting the loudest in the White House. We trade with nations that share our values, not our anger. We adapt, we innovate, and we move forward with or without a handshake from Washington. Then came the line that froze the room. Carney said, "We can always reconsider the U.S. if the trade policy ever changes." No sarcasm, no bitterness, just calm conviction. A diplomat's way of saying, we're done chasing chaos. But there's more, because that single sentence carried a quiet warning. It told the world that Canada has leverage, skilled labor, abundant resources, and global demand. We don't need permission to thrive. Meanwhile, Trump keeps throwing accusations across rallies, blaming everyone but himself. Carney, he answers with composure. He doesn't insult. He invites reflection. He doesn't posture. He performs. And that's what separates leadership from insecurity. Carney stands for progress, for a Canada that earns respect through consistency, not confrontation. Trump plays the crowd. Carney plays the long game. One screams about loyalty, the other builds credibility. And when history looks back on this moment, it'll remember the contrast, the noise of accusation versus the calm of confidence. Because Canada no longer needs validation from the U.S. It already has something stronger, self-respect.
Sorry, who's Brian's next question?
Why don't we have
We'll go to
Brian's
Brian.
question, and
Yep.
we'll follow up when you come.
I'll ask a version of this so you can answer it.
I figured you might.
If it is true that a TV ad, that you were close to a deal, exchanging term sheets, and a TV ad caused all of this to be canceled, halted, Trump does not want to meet, are you upset at Premier Doug Ford for running this ad? If this is true that this ad spoiled something that was very close?
Look, I'd say the following, which is that in any complicated, high-stakes negotiation, you can get unexpected twists and turns, and you have to keep your cool during those situations. It doesn't pay to be upset. Emotions don't carry you very far. And we had made progress, to repeat, and we stand by the progress that had been made. The Government of Canada does, and we are ready, when appropriate, to pick that up.
The next reporter didn't waste time. He asked Carney directly, "Did Doug Ford's ad disrupt relations and trade talks with the U.S.?" Carney paused, not for effect, but to stay calm. You could almost see him weighing his words. "If I'd listened to my emotions," he said softly, "I'd have been angry." But he wasn't. That's what separates him from the noise in Washington. But before we get into what Carney meant by that, we have to talk about Ford's ad itself. If you like Doug Ford or not, or think that ad was smart or reckless, one thing's certain, it was never going to make Trump apologize. Ford seems to believe that loudness equals leadership. He wanted a TV moment. Carney wants results. But Carney was just getting started here because then he turned toward the bigger picture. Global trade. Without saying the word directly, he pointed toward China. There are always international options. He said that wasn't just a hint, it was a message. Canada doesn't need to beg for access to one market when the entire world is open for business. But if you thought that was it, Carney went even deeper. He reminded everyone that leadership means staying calm when others shout. Trump keeps throwing accusations. Ford keeps urging confrontation. Yet Carney's leading a country through logic, not anger. If we want to hurt Trump, he implied, stop buying American goods, build and sell Canadian. That's how you make them listen. But there's more. Because Carney's approach isn't isolation, it's evolution. He knows trade power comes from confidence, not compliance. Turning away from the U.S. isn't bitterness, it's independence. Then came the moment that silenced the room. He ended with, "We can always reconsider the U.S. if the trade policy ever changes." No drama, no resentment, just composure. While Trump lashes out and Ford shouts from the sidelines, Carney represents something rare in politics today. Calm strength. He doesn't need validation, applause, or a Twitter war. He just needs one thing, for Canadians to believe in Canada again.
Follow-up?
And just to cast things ahead to where you're going later this week in Korea, can you give us an update on, do you expect to meet the Chinese president at APEC? And what kind of conversations do you expect to have with the Chinese delegation there?
I do expect to, there are plans for me and President Xi to meet. We will pick up on the discussions I had with Premier Li in New York a few weeks ago. A broad range of issues, both in terms of the commercial relationship, as well as the evolution of the global system. So I look forward to the meeting with the President.
The next reporter asked the question everyone was waiting for. Is PM Carney going to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping for a possible trade deal? Carney smiled again. That calm, deliberate smile that always says more than his words. "We're discussing our commercial relationships," he replied. Simple, careful. But everyone in the room knew what that meant. Trade talks are coming. But before we get into what Carney hinted about the China deal, we have to understand what this really represents. While Trump keeps threatening tariffs and calling Canada unreliable, Carney's out here doing what real leaders do, finding opportunity. He's confirming that Canada isn't afraid to look east, to build partnerships that actually make sense for Canadians, not for campaign slogans. But that's not all, because this time, Carney's hint carried weight. He wasn't just talking about vague cooperation. He mentioned commercial relationships. That's code. For business, manufacturing, cars. Insiders caught the signal. A potential entry for BYD, the Chinese electric vehicle giant, into the Canadian market. But Carney was just getting started here because he knows exactly what message that sends. Canada isn't scared of Stellantis moving plants to the U.S. We'll fill those gaps ourselves with local manufacturing, homegrown innovation, and yes, international alliances that keep us competitive. While Trump's busy building walls, Carney's building bridges quietly, strategically, and with the world's fastest-growing economies. But if you thought this was it, Carney went even deeper. He talked about strengthening domestic production. We have the people, the skill, the drive. He said it was a subtle reminder that Canada doesn't need to beg for investment. Investment follows stability. And right now, no one embodies that stability better than Carney. No jabs, no politics, just professionalism. Because while Trump rants about loyalty, Carney's out there earning respect. He's not fighting America. He's future-proofing Canada, and that's what makes him dangerous to Washington. He's turning Canada from a neighbor into a rival.